Well, good morning, everyone. It is great to be here with you this morning and just seeing all that God is doing here. I always love it when Cherie does the offering because we know we're going to get like a mini sermon, like a mini powerful word in the middle there, which is awesome. And so, Cherie, thank you for just your obedience in that and for just sharing what the Lord placed on your heart. It's just awesome. It's like a warm up into the rest of the message here, which is amazing. So this morning, you'll notice we have a little bit of an emptier section here. Our youth are at EMT, which is the Evangelistic Missions Training. We're so excited for them and just what God's going to be doing over the next week there. So you can pray for them as they go out. They're getting some training over the next few days, and then I think on Tuesday they start phase 2, which is outreach and Reading here, so not too far away. So just be praying for them as they go out, that the Lord would be with them, speaking through them. There being powerful encounters with people in Reading as they go out. So we're excited for that. And Pastor Merle is currently in Brazil. So the Dove Church in Brazil is celebrating 40 years this year. And so it's an amazing time. There's leaders literally, let's give just a hand to the Lord for that. So 40 years, and Pastor Merle is there with leaders from all over the world as they just celebrate and spend time together with that. And then coming up here, if you have not been here the last few weeks, this fall we're really excited. We're doing a series on Pastor Merle's book, Great Grace. And so it'll be a life group series that we're going to be going through. So just encourage you. It's not too late if you would like to lead a life group. You can talk to Pastor Matt about that. He'd love to get connected with you on that. And then in a couple weeks here, we'll have signups if you would like to join a life group for that. So we're really excited just about what the Lord is doing in this season here at Newport Church. There's so many things that we can just look to and say, wow, God, you're encountering your people here at Newport Church, and we're excited to see what he continues to do. So this week, I was reading an article that was really interesting to me. I have kind of a weird hobby or a weird habit. So if I'm bored or I can't sleep at night or like I just have like extra couple minutes, I love to go onto a website like Kayak or Google Flights, and I like to just find what is the cheapest possible flight I can find out of the U.S. It's like a weird habit, I know, but it's one of those things that for whatever reason, I really enjoy it. Megan really enjoys it because it means that we go some really cool places because I just find really random flights that are really cool. And I realized this week I was reading an article and I was like, man, I might have missed my calling. Like this might be what I should be doing. And it was this article about a travel agency. And so there's lots of travel agencies, there's lots of companies that set up flights, but they had a really interesting business model. So this company, they have people pay them to fly them to a destination and then to get them lost. So the business model of this company is we will take you somewhere in the world. You tell us like if you want a warm climate or a cold climate, like we get a couple details from you. And then we will drive you into the middle of nowhere and drop you off, and you have to find your way back to civilization. And people, this is one of those websites where they're like, you can take your private jet or you can fly commercial. Like it's that kind of thing where it's like, this is very exclusive, very expensive. The person that I was reading about, it was a single woman. She went to Morocco. She paid like $13,000 to go on this 10-day trip. And the whole idea is you go on this trip. So in her case, they flew her to a city in Morocco. They put her in a car. They drove her into like Morocco's kind of deserty, mountainy. So they drove her into like the kind of the mountain desert. And they took like a few days to train her on like, here's how you don't die. So like, here's how you build a tent. Here's how you like cook your food outdoors, all that stuff. And then they left her and they said, okay, you have 3 days to make it back to civilization. And I thought this was really cool. I was like, man, I would have so much fun with this, finding places to drop people off and be like, all right, have fun. Like, see you in 3 days. But I was reading about this, and the article I was reading was talking about why do people do this? Like, why is this thing? Because for most of us, probably getting dropped and in the middle of nowhere, getting lost, probably doesn't sound like a relaxing vacation, like where you're having to get trained on survival skills so you don't die, so you make it back to, where you're back to home. And there were two main things. The one was people that took these trips typically had very stressful lives. And they said that what they really liked was it put them in a place where all of their focus had to go into getting out of the situation. So it was like an artificial, stressful situation that they were placed in, that it took all of their attention. So all the stresses at home, all the stresses that they were walking through, all of a sudden it shifted to they just had to get from one point to the other. That was all they were focused on, cooking their next meal, getting ready for the next thing. That was all their focus. So I was like, okay, that makes sense. But the second thing that I thought was really interesting is they talked about how when they got done with this experience, they experienced a level of confidence when they got home that they hadn't experienced before. That there was something about being in this place where they were having to do a skill. Most of them, they weren't survival experts. These were people, probably a lot like you and I, that, if we got dropped off, we would need some training to be able to get back to civilization. But it built their confidence so that even when they went back to their jobs, things were different. There was a difference in the way that they thought about things. There was a difference in the way they approached things because they had gone through this experience in the wilderness that had built something in them that they were able to take home with them when they went back to their lives. And so this morning, we're going to look at another wilderness story. We're going to look at somebody else's story that was a little bit longer than 3 days. It was more like 40 years. But it was someone that had to go through things to be able to build the skill set for what they were called to do next. So we're going to look at the story of Joshua this morning. And if you have your Bibles, you can turn with me to Exodus 17. This is kind of the first time that we encounter Joshua here. And just to give you some context of what's happening where we pick up the story with Joshua. So Joshua was part of the nation of Israel, and they had just come out of the land of Egypt. So Moses had been used by God to come and set the people free from Egypt. So it had all these plagues and all these miracles, and the Red Sea had parted, and they had walked through, and now they're on their way to the Promised Land. And so they are in the wilderness, and the Amalekites come out to fight them, and Moses is telling Joshua, hey, you need to go fight these Amalekites. And so we pick up the story here with Joshua in verse 10. So Exodus 17, verse 10. So Joshua fought the Amalekites as Moses had ordered, and Moses, Aaron, and Hur went to the top of the hill. As long as Moses held up his hands, the Israelites were winning. But whenever he lowered his hands, the Amalekites were winning. When Moses' hands grew tired, they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. Aaron and Hur held his hands up, one on one side and one on the other, so that his hands remained steady till sunset. So Joshua overcame the Amalekite army with the sword. So this morning, I want you to try to place yourself in Joshua's situation. So this is someone, at this point, Joshua was about 40 years old. They had just come out of slavery in Egypt. We don't know what Joshua did in Egypt, so maybe he had military training, maybe he didn't. We're not really sure, but he comes into the wilderness. They face this army. He's in the midst of battle, and the outcome of the battle is not determined by how well Joshua fights. This isn't based off of Joshua's strategy. It's not based off of Joshua's skill. It's based off of whether someone can keep their hands above their heads for the entire day. So imagine you're in Joshua's shoes, and you're fighting literally for your life. You're trying to lead an army, but you're dependent upon somebody else for the outcome. It'd be really easy, at least I would think for me, it'd be really easy to be very frustrated with that scenario. Be like, wait a minute, Lord. This doesn't seem fair. I'm the one that at personal risk. Moses is just up on the hill. He's just sitting up there trying to keep his arms up. I'm the one that's down here having to fight. This doesn't seem like a fair arrangement. And yet we don't see any of that in Joshua's story. We see him being faithful in the battle. We see him being faithful in serving the Lord and playing his part in the battle. There are going to be moments in our walk with the Lord where we do not control the outcome of the situation that we are in. It might be a moment where you get a really hard health diagnosis or a really messy relationship blows up, and all of a sudden you're having to deal with the blowback from that. And you might be sitting there saying, wait a minute, Lord, this doesn't make sense. This isn't fair. But the question is, how do you respond in those moments? And do you respond out of a place of obedience and saying, okay, Lord, what is my part to play? I might not be able to control the outcome of the situation. I might not be in control of how this gets worked out, but what part do you have for me to play? And am I willing to play that part? Am I willing to take on risk even in this? Maybe it's relational risk. Maybe it's risk in a work environment or whatever that might look like. But am I willing to trust you and to play the part that you're calling me to? To recognize that I'm part of a larger story. This isn't all about me. And so I want to play the part that you have for me. Joshua knew what it meant to play his part. So do we follow Jesus well even when we don't control the outcome? So a little bit later, we pick up the story with Joshua again. And Joshua is, Moses is getting ready to send 12 spies into the promised land. And so they've come out of Egypt. This isn't that long after the battle with the Amalekites. They've come out of Egypt. They're getting ready to go into the promised land. Moses wants to send out 12 spies. And so they're getting set for this, this big moment of we're going to go see this land that the Lord has told us about, that he's promised to us. And there's this really interesting verse. I honestly, as I was studying this week, I was like, I don't know if I've ever actually noticed this before. But in Numbers 13, verses 16, we read, so it had just gone through talking about all the names of the men that Moses was going to send in. And it says, these are the names of the men whom Moses sent to spy on the land. But Moses called Hosea, the son of Nun, Joshua. Joshua wasn't originally called Joshua. Joshua was originally called Hosea. And when you look at this, you might be wondering, what's the difference? Why did God decide to change, or why did Moses decide to change Joshua's name? And there's a couple of reasons for this, a couple of reasons that people kind of speculate around this. One of them is for a practical reason. And oftentimes when someone is choosing their second in command, they would change their name. So you see this in the story of Joseph with Pharaoh, where Pharaoh changed Joseph's name when he took over the second in command. You see this in stories like with Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar, where Nebuchadnezzar changes Daniel's name. There's something about pointing someone into a leadership role where the leader gives them their name, kind of speaks like an identity over them. And so in this case, Moses changes Joshua's name, but I think what's really telling is what he changes his name from and what he changes his name to. So the name Hosea means salvation. So salvation, it's a good name, it's a good meaning. The name Joshua means the Lord is salvation. It's a subtle shift from salvation to the Lord is salvation. And I think about Joshua's story, and I think about all the times where Joshua might have felt the pressure of, I need to save this people. I need to be the one that leads them into the promised land. I need to be the one that makes the decisions, that has the right strategy, that has the right skill set. This is all on me. And I think Moses' name change for Joshua highlights probably something that Moses was trying to tell him is, hey, this is not your job. The Lord is the salvation of his people, not you. When you go into the promised land, it is not about you. It is about the Lord bringing his people into the promised land. And I think the timing of this is really good because Joshua and these 12 guys are about to go into the promised land. And if Joshua had gone in thinking about it from his own skill set, from his own strategy, from his own experience, I'm sure he would have felt like the 10 other guys that were like, this is impossible. I can't lead this people into this land. This is too big for me. He would have seen the fortified walls and the giants that were in the land, and he would have had that same moment of doubt of thinking, I can't do this. This isn't, I'm not up for this. The Lord hasn't prepared me enough for this. I mean, at this point, they didn't know they were going to be wandering for 40 years. Joshua was probably thinking, this is like next month, we're going to be going and doing this. And so for him to go into the promised land and instead have the name of the Lord is salvation, I think it changed his mindset to see, no, this isn't, my responsibility is not to figure out how to solve this problem. My responsibility is to follow the Lord and what he is calling us to do next. There are going to be moments in our lives where the Lord is going to call you to something that feels impossible, or it feels too big, or it feels like, I don't have the skill set to do this. And the challenge is, do we recognize that if he's calling you to the promise, he's going to give you the grace you need. He's going to give you what you need to accomplish what he calls you to. And so often we self-select ourselves out of the promises of the Lord because we look at the situation and we say, well, I don't have the finances, or I don't have the skill set, or I don't have the faith to do that. And I think the challenge from the Lord is you're looking at it from the standpoint of it's all about you when it's really all about him. It's really all about us following him into that situation, into that moment, saying, okay, Lord, I don't know how you're going to do this. I don't know what it's going to look like, but I'm not going to base my response to this based off of what I see in myself. I'm going to base my response to this off of what you see in me in this situation. And rather than getting caught up in all the stress and strategy, like, I'm one of those people, I love to have everything planned out. Like, I'm a numbers guy. I want to crunch the numbers. I want to see, okay, like, how are we going to do this? What's the budget for this? How do we make this work? But there's moments where I have to be like, all right, Lord, I don't know how you're going to do this. And so my role in this is to follow you and to hold it with open hands and say, okay, what do you want to do? How do you want me to respond in this situation? And we see Joshua and Caleb, they go into promised land with these 10 other guys, and they come back, and the 10 other guys are kind of getting all the people riled up around, we can't do this, this is too big, we're not able to. And it's really funny because you look at all that the Lord just brought them through, like a few months earlier, like he parted the Red Sea, he had plagues come down on the land of Egypt, like all they had just come through, and yet how quickly the people's faith went away in what the Lord could do. And I say that not from a place of like, man, they were really bad at this, but more from a place of how easy is it for us to forget our own testimony of what the Lord has done, where we don't remember, oh, wait, I remember when he provided for that need that I had 3 years ago. I can have confidence because I've seen him provide. I've seen him do things. I've seen him work in ways that I never expected. But it's so easy to get caught up in life. It's so easy to look at things with natural eyes and forget about what the Lord has done. And that's why it's so important to share our testimonies. That's why it's so important to write them down, to go back to them. I mean, if you look at the Old Testament, the Lord is constantly telling them, hey, build a memorial so that you can tell your children about this someday, so you don't forget what I've done for you. We need to build memorials in our life. We need to build areas where we look back and we say, I can see what the Lord has done. I've seen his faithfulness. Not just to encourage our hearts now, but to build our faith for what's next. To build our faith for what he is going to do in the future. And so Joshua and Caleb, they go into the land with these 10 guys, and they come back, and I want you to listen to their response to these guys that are coming back, and they're talking about the promised land. So in Numbers 14, verse 7, it says, the land, this is them talking, the land which we passed through to spy out is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord is pleased with us, then he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land which flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not fear the people of the land, for they will be our prey. Their protection is gone from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them. But all the congregation said to stone them with stones. Then the glory of the Lord appeared in the tent of meeting to all the sons of Israel. You have to have a lot of conviction to stand up for what you believe when people are about to stone you. You have to have a lot of conviction. I look at myself and I think, man, would I be willing to say, hey, guys, we need to do this, to the point where people are starting to pick up rocks to throw at me? Like, that's a pretty core conviction that Joshua and Caleb had. And yet we see the Lord's faithfulness in that. In fact, he shows up to rescue them in that situation. And it turns out that they are the only two from their generation that gets to enter into the promised land because of their faith and because of their confidence in the Lord. Do we trust in the Lord more than we trust in our own perspective? In Psalm 20, verse 7, David echoes this thought in saying, some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God. We trust in the name of the Lord our God. It is God who brings us into the land, not our own hand. In 1 Peter 1, verses 3 and 5 through 8, it says, "His divine power has given us everything we need for a godly life through our knowledge of him who called us by his own glory and goodness. For this very reason, make every effort to add to your faith goodness, and to goodness knowledge, and to knowledge self-control, and to self-control perseverance, and to perseverance godliness, and to godliness mutual affection, and to mutual affection love. For if we possess these qualities in increasing measure, they will keep you from being ineffective and unproductive in your knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ." We have been given everything that we need through Jesus for life and godliness. And also there's an increasing measure that we have the opportunity to walk in. And what I love about this is if you look at the story of Joshua, from where he starts to where he ends, I guarantee you there were aspects that he needed that time in the wilderness with the Lord to grow in increasing measure in what the Lord was calling him to. And it can be really easy, I think, for us to look at wilderness seasons or look at times where, man, life just is not fun right now. Like this thing that I'm walking through is not something I'm enjoying. This is a struggle. But to look at it as, Lord, what are you wanting to prepare in me in this season? What are you wanting to grow in me in this season? Is there something that you're wanting to plant because there's going to be fruit in the next season that I'm going to reap from it? And to turn our perspective, instead of just saying, well, I want to get through this as quickly as I possibly can because this sucks and I don't enjoy it, to saying, Lord, I recognize that you're probably doing a work in this. How can I partner with you? How can I grow in increasing measure in what you're wanting to do so that I'm not unproductive and ineffective in this season? Another story with Joshua that I really love is in Exodus 33, and it's one of those short verses. It's really easy to go through quickly. But in Exodus 33:11, it's talking first about Moses. It said, "So the Lord used to speak to Moses face to face, just as a man speaks to his friends. When Moses returned to the camp, his servant Joshua, the son of Nun, a young man, would not depart from the tent." And the tent that they're talking about would have been the tent of meeting. It was where the Lord's presence dwelled in the camp. So it was where there was fire by day was resting over top of the tent, and fire by night, cloud by day was resting over it, and it was a place of the Lord's presence. And so we're reading here that Joshua didn't want to leave the Lord's presence, that he had a desire to sit in the Lord's presence. When we go through, whether it's a difficult season or a good season, do we look for the Lord's presence to empower our lives and our leaderships? Do we look for, Lord, I want to be focused on your presence, on receiving from you before I go into any other situation, before I walk into anything else? I want to focus on getting your heart, your perspective. I want to focus on worshiping you, on making sure my eyes are fixed on you before I walk into any other situation, before I go into any other season. And I think Joshua knew that he was eventually going to be the one that was going to lead the people into the promised land. And I think he recognized, I need to be in God's presence as much as I possibly can. Because he would have seen the way that Moses interacted with the Lord. As Moses' assistant, Joshua often is kind of like on the edges of the story. So like Moses goes up on a Mount Sinai, and we know that Joshua went at least part of the way up the mountain with him. And, Moses goes in the tent of meeting, and we can assume that Joshua oftentimes was in the tent of meeting with Moses. And so there's these moments of Joshua getting to watch another leader have an encounter with the Lord, and you have to imagine that stirred hunger in Joshua's own heart. For I want to have that kind of relationship with the Lord. I want to have that kind of impact with God. Do we have the understanding of the need for God's presence in our lives? There's a story about Billy Graham that I've thought about many times over the years, especially as I've started preaching here at Newport. And it's a story, there was a security guard that was telling it, and he was a security guard for one of the events that Billy Graham was doing. And he was backstage, and his one job was to make sure Billy Graham was like okay, make sure everything was good back there. That was like his one job. And he went out to check something in an alley, and he came back in, and he had lost Billy Graham. He couldn't find him. And so the security guard is panicked, thinking, oh no, like I've just lost Billy Graham. What am I supposed to do? And so he's frantically searching around. He's trying to find him. And all of a sudden he hears what sounds like someone crying from the catwalk up above the stage. And he goes up, and Billy Graham was on his knees, and he was crying out to the Lord, saying, I cannot do this without you. I need your presence before I go out. I need you, Holy Spirit, before I go out. And you might think Billy Graham was about to speak to thousands of people, but actually he was only going to speak to about 50 leaders that day. And if there's anyone that could have gone out and had a sermon that was pretty good, it was probably Billy Graham. Like he was good at speaking. He had years of experience at speaking. He had all the qualifications that you would look for in someone like that, and yet he recognized, I need the Lord's presence before I go into this. Do we recognize the need for the Lord's presence in our lives? Do we recognize when it's not just in ministry, but it's in when you walk into that business meeting, Lord, I want to take your presence with me. I don't want to make decisions aside from you. I don't want to have this separation of my spiritual life is over here and the rest of my life's over here. I want to take you with me wherever I go. When I go into that classroom this week and I'm teaching those students, I want your presence to be with me because I want to know how to best serve these students. I want to know how to best impact these students. When I go into my job this week and I'm dealing with that coworker that's really difficult, I want to take your presence with me because I want to see them from your perspective, not my own. And that comes from that time of presence with the Lord. That comes from that time of hearing from his heart. And, it doesn't mean that all of us are going to have the same amount of time where, to spend an hour every day and, that's your download time. That's amazing if you get that. But it might just be, hey, when I'm on my way into work and I know what's coming up on my day, I'm going to take time and I'm going to focus on the Lord and I'm going to invite his presence into my day. I'm going to worship him. I'm going to ask for his perspective. Or it might be you're about to go in a meeting and you're like, Lord, I need your perspective, so I'm going to go sit in the bathroom stall for a minute, and I'm just going to pray because that's the private place that I have at work, and I'm going to pray for your wisdom. But it's recognizing the need for it, and then it's making the space for it. Because it can be really easy just to be like, well, I didn't have time for my devotions this morning, so I guess I'm not going to ask the Lord what his perspective is today. But to recognize, no, this can happen anywhere at any time. See, Joshua was in the tent of meeting, but we know that the Holy Spirit dwells within us. And so we carry him with us wherever we go. And so we have that opportunity, just like Joshua did in the tent of meeting, to encounter the Lord, to be with him at any point in our day. It's just taking that time and that space with him. It's creating that space to have that encounter with him. We need more than strategy in our lives. We need the Lord's Spirit. So I want to take a quick pause here in Joshua's story, because maybe you're wondering, maybe the question is going through your mind of, why in the world is God calling this people to this piece of land? Like, what is it about the promised land? Like, God had promised it to Abraham. It's been, hundreds of years since then. Why is the promised land so special that God is having his people go through all of these things to get to the promised land? Because it's a lot of, between the plagues in Egypt and wandering in the wilderness for 40 years, what is it about the promised land that is so special? And that's a great question that I'm happy to get to answer for you, hopefully a little bit today. And the promised land, the land of Canaan, where the Israelites were being called to, was not what you would expect from this is so much more fertile than where they had been. So you might be it's really easy when you read it, because the land flowing with milk and honey, to think oh, they were coming from the dunes of Egypt into this wonderful lush garden that the Lord is calling them to. And actually, they were in Egypt. They were in the land of Goshen. And if you remember in the story of Joseph, when he had gone to Pharaoh and Pharaoh had given them land, and Joseph had asked for the land of Goshen, this was an arrangement that worked out really well for both the Egyptians and for the Israelites. Because the land of Goshen was in the Nile River Delta, and it would flood for 2 months out of the year. And the Egyptians were not a nomadic people. They really liked to have houses that were stable, that stayed there. They didn't want flooded basements, as some of you have probably experienced in the last month. They wanted to be in places that were not affected by the flooding. Whereas the Israelites were nomadic people. So for them to pack up their tents for 2 months out of the year and move, a few miles inland was not a big deal. And so the Israelites were living in this place, and because it was the Nile River Delta, all of the nutrients and kind of the wash of the Nile would come up and dump into this particular area when it flooded. And so they've done soil samples for it, and the Nile River Delta, where the land of Goshen was, the top soil of this, the nutrient-rich soil, is about 100 feet deep. And so maybe you're like, I have no idea what that means. Like, is topsoil normally 100 feet deep? No, topsoil is not normally 100 feet deep. In fact, in the U.S., one of the most fertile places you can go, like Nebraska or kind of out in the Midwest, topsoil there is 4 to 6 feet deep. So the Israelites were dwelling in this place that had incredibly fertile soil. And so it wasn't that they were moving from because you think about Egypt, you're like, well, it's all sand dunes and dust and stuff. No, they were moving from something that was really fertile that could have provided for their natural needs to somewhere else. And so why was the Lord calling them from the land of Egypt into the promised land? What was the promise that they were going after? And if you look at God's promise to Abraham, it was that the nation of Israel would be a blessing to all nations, that he was going to use this people to show his heart to the world. And while Egypt was a major empire, if you look at a map, it's kind of a little out of the way of the rest of the nations, where if you look at the promised land, if you look at the nation of Israel, it was at the crossroads of the ancient world. It was at a point where people from the east and from the west would cross in trade routes. It was a place where the name of the Lord could be taken to the ends of the earth because of the encounters people would have in the land of Israel. There was a reason that God chose to place his people there. It was because the Lord was recognizing that it wasn't just about how fertile the land was, though, obviously it was a fertile place. They were able to grow crops and do what they needed. But it was because he recognized the need for his people to be an example to the nations. And so my question for you is, what is the crossroads that the Lord is placing you at? Who are the people that the Lord is bringing across your path that you get to tell about his name, that you get to share about who he is with? Because it's really easy to look at the natural circumstances and be like, man, it looks a lot more fertile over there. I really wish I was, in this job, or I really wish I was in this family, or, whatever the crossroads is for you. But asking the question of the Lord, why have you placed me here? Who are you wanting me to bless through this situation, through these people that I am encountering every day? Because I guarantee you were placed where you're at not on accident. That there is something that the Lord wants to use you for in that. There is a way that he wants to bless people through your life, no matter where you're at, and you have an opportunity to do that. So as we move forward with the story of Joshua, we finally get to a spot where Moses knows that he's going to be passing away soon. He's not going to be entering into the promised land. And so he anoints Joshua to be the next leader. He has a conversation with the Lord that was basically like, Lord, I know I'm not going to the promised land. Who do you want to lead the people? Don't leave them without a shepherd. Moses actually has this conversation with the Lord of being very intentional of, Lord, someone needs to lead your people. Don't leave them alone. And the Lord says, well, Joshua has a spirit of leadership on him. This is the guy I've been preparing. This is the one that's going to take the people into the promised land. And so he anoints Joshua, and we read in Deuteronomy 34:9, and Joshua the son of Nun was full of the spirit of wisdom, for Moses had laid his hands on him. And I just want to highlight that because as they're about to go into the promised land, there's this moment of succession and leadership where Moses passes on the leadership to Joshua, and we read that he is filled with the spirit of wisdom. And, had been 40 years wandering in the desert to get to this point. But at the moment that he needed it, he was filled and commissioned and ready to go. And there's going to be moments where you face something and you're going to have to be in faith. All right, Lord, I'm going to trust that you're going to give me what I need when I need it to enter into the land that you're calling me to enter into the promise that you're calling me to, and to trust that he will give you what you need in those moments. He will fill you with what you need to be filled with. There's a grace in the season that he calls you to. So Joshua has this spirit of wisdom from the Lord, and he and the Israelites go into the promised land. There's this moment of the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant across, and the waters of the Jordan stop, and they enter in, and then they reinstitute Passover and circumcision. There's kind of like this callback almost to, hey, this is a fresh start into the Lord's promise. This is the new generation, and so we're going to consecrate ourselves for the work that the Lord's going to call us to in taking the promised land. And so they go through this, and they get to the first obstacle of the promised land, which is the city of Jericho. And you have to imagine for Joshua, he's like, all right, Lord, like it's been 40 years wandering in the wilderness. I'm here now. How are we going to do this? Because the Israelites were not like a sieging people. They were not somebody that, when you think of taking a city back then that had like ramps or things that they could put up to take down the walls, there were people that were used to fighting in the desert. And now all of a sudden they're having to take cities. And so I'm sure even from a skill set or just a knowledge base, Joshua was probably feeling like, I don't know how we're going to do this. I don't know what to do. And we pick up this moment with him where he's by Jericho, and I don't know exactly how it happened, but I imagine Joshua just kind of wandering away from the camp, just praying to the Lord and saying, God, I don't know what to do next. And then this is what happened. So Joshua 5, verses 13 and 14, it says, when Joshua was by Jericho, he lifted up his eyes and looked. And behold, a man was standing before him with his drawn sword in his hand. And Joshua went to him and said to him, are you with us or for our adversaries? And he said, no. But I am the commander of the army of the Lord. Now I have come. Does anything bother you about that interaction? I was reading this week, and I was like, wait, what am I missing here? Because you read about God providing all of these ways for the Israelites to enter into the promised land. In the very next chapter, he gives Joshua the instructions of how to take Jericho. And yet when Joshua asks him, are you for us or are you for our adversaries? He just says no. I mean, what is happening with that question? And as I was thinking about this week, I was like, Lord, you've been for your people this whole time. Like, you even say at times, I am for you. Like, I am your God and you are my people. Like, there's a very clear definition between them and the other people in the land. So what is happening here? So I wrestled with this question this week. I was looking up different theologians. I was asking my wife, Megan, because sometimes she's got, insight into things like this. And there's lots of different things ways that you can interpret this. So I'm going to give you my interpretation, what I felt like I landed on, and then you can go and research it and do your own research and see what you think. But when I was looking through this, it seems like the Lord was actually telling Joshua, you're asking the wrong question. You're asking the wrong question. You're asking, am I for you or am I for them? And the reality is, it's not about me being for them or for you. It's about my story. It's about my plans and my purposes. It's about you being with me, not me being with you. We live in a really, really polarizing time. We live in a time where it's very easy to take sides, to have a side of, well, I'm in the right because this is what I believe, and they're in the wrong because that's what they believe. And honestly, a lot of it, you might be right. Like, yes, this is the truth, and what they're believing is not the truth. And it's so easy to sit in those camps and say, no, but I'm right. I know I'm right, and I know they're wrong, and I'm going to stand on what I'm right with, and God must be with me because I am right about this. I mean, you just look at politics right now on both sides, and the Republicans are like, well, God is clearly with us because we believe right is right, and Democrats believe God is clearly with us because we believe what is right. Like, there's this focus on, well, what is, like, who's right in this scenario? And I just wonder if the Lord would respond with that same, no. This is not what the focus is about. It's about what his plans and his purposes are on the earth. It's about his direction. It's about looking to him and saying, Lord, it's not that we don't have good theology or that we don't participate in politics or that we don't interact with society. It's not about those things. But it's about understanding that we want the Lord's perspective and we want to look to him first. We don't want to make it about whose side is whose. Like, whose side are you on, Lord, in this argument? Or whose side are you on in this situation? Because we know that God's heart is for people. And we know that his perspective is so much greater than ours. And we look at story after story. Would it have been really easy to look at someone and say, well, God is clearly against them. But then his redemption story turns it around. I think about the story of Saul, where he had persecuted the Lord's church. And it would have been really easy for the church to be like, well, God's clearly on our side, and he's clearly against Paul. And yet the Lord was doing something in that situation that went beyond anything the church could have imagined. And here, this guy that had persecuted the church became the Apostle Paul, who wrote most of the New Testament. God flipped the story around. Do we leave room in our lives for God to flip the story around in people's lives? Do we leave space when we interact with somebody that believes differently than us, that is upset about an issue or that is arguing with us? Do we leave space for the redemptive story of the Lord in their lives, or do we shut it down because we want to be right? And it's not that we don't stand on truth, but it's the way that we stand on truth. It's the way that we interact with people. It's asking for the Father's heart for people. And maybe sometimes the Father's heart is, hey, you need to bring correction here because this is off. But maybe it's, hey, in this situation, it's not about you being right. It's really about loving this person. And here's how I want to guide you. Here's how I want you to interact with them. But it's stopping the rhetoric of God's on my side and he's not on their side. And it's asking the question, Lord, what are you doing here? And we look at Joshua's response in this story where the commander of the Lord's army, and just a quick side note on that, most theologians believe that was actually pre-incarnate Jesus, because what happens next is Joshua falls on his face in worship, and the man does not reject the worship, which in other scenarios, if people bow down to angels and tried to worship them, the angels were like, no, you don't worship me. And so in this scenario, the thought is that this was actually a Christophany, which is a pre-incarnate moment where Christ stepped into the story. But Joshua's response in this moment was to worship. It was to say, Lord, I want to lift you high. I want you to be the focus above everything else. So he responded with worship, and then he responded with the question, Lord, how would you have me serve you? What does it look like for me to serve you in this situation? And I just wonder how often, as a church, if that was our response to the issues, to the times where people came up, where we said, all right, Lord, I disagree with this, or I have an issue with this, but first I'm going to worship you because I want you to be the focus. I don't want myself being right to be the focus. I want you to be the focus. And then secondly, I'm going to ask the question of you, what would you have me do? How would you have me serve you in this situation? What does that look like? In 1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 1, Paul gives a great example of this, or a great way of doing this. He says, he's talking to Timothy here, he says, first of all, then, I urge that supplications, prayers, intercessions, and thanksgivings be made for all people, for kings and all who are in high positions, that we may lead a peaceful and quiet life, godly and dignified in every way. This is good, and it is pleasing in the sight of God our Savior, who desires all people to be saved and come to the knowledge of the truth. See, God had a story for his people. He was going to provide a way to conquer Jericho. It wasn't that he was against the Israelites, but I believe it was because Joshua was asking the wrong question. So are we asking the Lord the right question when we come into conflict, when we have someone that we say, they're the adversary, they're the enemy, they're the one that we're against? Are we asking the Lord the right question in those scenarios? So, Jen and the worship team, you guys can come up. This morning, we took some time to look at Joshua's story, and we only got to cover a small portion of it. But I want to encourage you in your walk with the Lord this morning to look to him, to ask the questions of him, to spend the time in his presence. We're going to take some time in just a minute here actually to there's some reflection questions that I have, or maybe you have a question that you're like, the Holy Spirit brought this up and I want to think about it. But to take some time with the Lord and to ask his question and to seek his face in those moments. And one of the things that I really love towards the end of the book of Joshua is in chapter 21, verse 45. It says, "Not one of all the Lord's promises to Israel failed. Every one was fulfilled." The Lord is faithful to fulfill his promises. When we make the choice to follow after him with our whole heart, he is faithful to fulfill the promises that he has. Something that gets lost in our English translations is Joshua's name. So Joshua, and I'm not a Hebrew scholar, so I'm not going to pronounce this correctly, but Yeshua, there's a little bit of difference there. And if you are familiar with Jesus' name in Hebrew, Yeshua, they're almost identical. They're almost the same name. In fact, they have the same root name. And Joshua had a mandate from the Lord to take the people into the promised land. He was the one that was helping to prepare the way for the people to go into the promised land. And just like Joshua prepared the way for the Israelites to enter the promised land, Jesus has prepared the way for us to enter into God's promises. It's through his life, death, and resurrection that we get to live in the promises of God. Ephesians 1, verses 13 and 14 says, "In him," talking about Jesus, "you also, when you heard the word of truth, the gospel of your salvation, and believed in him, were sealed with the promised Holy Spirit, who is the guarantee of our inheritance until we acquire possession of it, to the praise of his glory." It's through Jesus that we get to experience the promises of God today. If you haven't made the decision to follow Jesus, I want to invite you today to make that decision. We'll have people up at the front that you can talk to and pray with. But the way of following Jesus, the way of making him Lord of our lives, is the way that we get to experience the promises of God, both in this life and the next. It's his truth, it's his goodness, and it's through Jesus. So this morning I have some questions for you to think about, to ponder, to take with you as we go into worship, maybe something that the Holy Spirit wants to speak to you about. And so the first question here, we'll have them on the screen. They're also in the app at the bottom of the sermon notes. So if you want to take a picture or scroll to the bottom, you can. But the first question is, if you are in a wilderness season, what are some ways God is preparing you now for what is coming in the future? What are some ways that you can recognize, oh, I am growing in this. The Lord is developing this in me. So asking the Lord that question. Next question, is there an area God is asking you to trust him without knowing the outcome? Maybe there's an area where you don't know what the outcome's going to be, but the Lord is saying, will you trust me in this? Is there a promise from God that feels too big for you to accomplish on your own ability? Is there something that you feel like this is something the Lord has called me to, that I feel like there's a promise that he has for me, but it feels too big for me right now? And what is that? And will you place your faith and your trust in him? Next question is, how are you creating space in your life to dwell in God's presence like Joshua did in the tent? Maybe there's a specific time in your day that the Lord is calling you to spend time with him, or maybe even there's a certain activity. Maybe it's when you wash the dishes or when you're driving into work, but is there a time that the Lord is asking you, hey, would you set aside this time to spend in my presence? Maybe it's getting up earlier in the morning. Maybe he's saying, hey, for this season, would you get up a little bit earlier to spend time in my presence? And if you are struggling with a desire to do that, because I know some seasons it's like, Lord, I want to do that, but this is really hard. Ask him. Ask him to give you the grace in this season. So often we don't ask, and I think the Lord longs to give us those desires. He longs to give us the grace to do that, but we have to ask for it. And the last question, is there a place where you need to stop striving and start trusting the Lord of the promise? Is there a place where you have been trying to make something happen, and the Lord is saying, I need you to stop trying to rely on your own abilities, but to trust me in this instead? So we're going to take a few moments here in worship, and I encourage you to reflect on those. And then a little bit, I'll come back up. We'll have the prayer ministers come up if you'd like prayer for anything, and we'll go from there.
Thank you so much for watching this teaching. I hope that it impacted you in some way. If you enjoyed this teaching and would like more teachings like this, feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel and get updated each time we post a new sermon.